Okay, so here's a glimpse at the basic ingredients that is going into this Danish dough recipe. And as with most European pastry recipes, there's not a lot of ingredients, just some really nice staple ingredients here. Basically just flour. This is bread flour, organic bread flour. I'm using the organic eggs. As always, we have some organic cold milk here. It's just some sea salt. This here is fresh compressed yeast, some organic granulated sugar, and I'm using this European style 82% butter here that I got at the restaurant store. I think this is pretty good butter for these pastries. You want to use the 82% if you can get it. The organic butter that I have access to, unfortunately, is only like a 78-79% butterfat. So the first thing we're going to do here to get this recipe rolling is we're going to mix these eggs here into the pitcher of milk and just whip that together. Had milk going all over the place there. So it is pretty important that you work with your ingredients cold for Danish dough. I know that sounds counterintuitive, and in a lot of baking recipes you're using room temperature ingredients, but in this case you want to work with your ingredients very cold. If it is extra warm where you're at, if you're doing this in the summer or in a southern climate, then you definitely would want to mix this up and refrigerate it for an hour or so in the refrigerator before you start mixing your dough. And that's just so you get a nice structure to this Danish dough. I'm going to show you how this goes together. Now we can start to mix this dough. So this is quite a lot of the fresh yeast, and it takes a while to just to dissolve in this cold liquid. So what I decided to do here is we're just going to do this by hand. We're going to do everything by hand. I'm going to take some of this milk and egg mixture and just dissolve all this fresh yeast in this first. So then as soon as you have that fresh yeast dissolved in there, then you can transfer all that back into the bulk of your milk and eggs. So what we have in there so far is just cold whole milk and eggs, and now the yeast. Traditionally, if I was making this in a traditional Danish patisserie, viennoiserie, and say like somewhere in Europe, especially Denmark, traditionally you would be putting ground cardamom into this Danish dough. But since this Danish dough is going to be for my cinnamon pastries, I'm not going to put the cardamom in. Instead, I'm opting to put a little bit of this vanilla paste that I found in here. If I can get the jar open, that is. So I'm just going to put a little bit in here. This is just for a little bit of flavoring, totally optional. You don't have to do this. If you're really a huge fan of cardamom, then you could just go ahead and add a teaspoon or two of the cardamom in here. Personally, I think that cardamom, even though I do really like the taste of cardamom, it's very, very assertive. and I don't want it to interfere with the taste of the cinnamon in these rolls. So just mix all that together real well. Then you can put in your granulated sugar and your salt. Give that a good whisk. So there you go. That's the wet ingredients right there, all whisked together. And now to make this easier on myself, I'm going to be using this bowl here. Just going to, I do have a stand mixer that might be able to fit this much, but I'm a little worried that it might not be quite big enough to handle this capacity. So I'm just going to be doing this by hand. Make a well in the center, and then the easiest way of doing this, I think the most effective implement to use this to mix this dough up is using a dough card. And we're just trying to make a rough mass with this right now, and then as soon as it all kind of comes together, I'm going to turn it out on the table here, turn it out onto the marble and work it a little bit. This is Danish dough after all, so a little bit of strength in the gluten is not a bad thing. Obviously, just like any pastry dough, you're not going to want to overwork it, but you're using bread flour in this recipe, so I think that it can stand a little bit of working. So then, once your dough comes together in a shaggy mass like that, then you can just put a little bit of bench flour, not too much, but turn this out onto the surface here, and we'll work this with my hands a little bit. So this dough does seem a little sticky, but don't go adding in a bunch of flour to it or anything like that. Just keep working it until you don't see any more dry bits of flour. It'll come together. So as soon as you have your Danish dough put together here, put it back in a mixing bowl, kind of roll it up in a ball and put this in the refrigerator. Put a tight wrap over this, and we're going to refrigerate this for at least an hour, hour and a half to cool this dough down. And we're going to work on this butter block here. So I've pulled our Danish dough base out of the refrigerator. It's had a couple of hours now to chill down, and now I'm working on this butter block. And depending upon which size recipe you're using, now this is a large batch, so what I'm making here is approximately a 10 by 10 square. And what this butter, even though it looks soft, it's actually cold and tempered butter, which means that you pull your unsalted butter out of the refrigerator and let it soften for a little while, just for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, and then I put this into a stand mixer and worked it so it's still cold but yet pliable. And what you're looking for is you want the texture of this butter block to roughly be the exact same texture as this dough. It should basically be the same consistency. because what we're going to do is form this into a perfect square, and then we're going to work this butter into this dough. You may have heard the term laminated dough, or this is actually considered a class of pastries called viennoiserie, if I'm saying that right. So now let me show you how we're going to roll this into a fine Danish dough with lots and lots and lots of nice buttery flaky layers. And so now, since my butter block in this particular recipe is 10 inches by 10 inches, I'm going to want to try to work this dough out to about 15 or 16 inch square, keeping your corners nice and squared off like that. So just roll, square up, let it relax, and coax this into a perfect square. Just check and make sure that this butter has not gone too soft. It's roughly the same consistency as the dough. And then put this into kind of a diamond pattern here on your dough, and pull these corners over, each one of these corners. And what you want to do is pinch that together real good and go the whole way around here. And hopefully you're not having to stretch the dough too much to accomplish this. Just kind of, you're making almost like a letter here, encasing that butter into the Danish dough base. So now what I like to do is put the seam side down to roll the first turn, as they say. So I'm using this dough tool to flip it. So now just start to work this dough together. And I'm going to roll this out into about what you want is about a 1/2 inch thickness of a rectangle. So I'm going to be giving this dough the first letter fold, which is just a simple trifold. I'm using the large dough tool here to try to make sure nothing is sticking. I'll show you basically what this looks like. Hopefully you can see all this, but it's kind of hard to hold the camera and do this with one hand. So basically what you're doing here is you're folding 1/3 of the dough over on top of itself, and now I'm going to fold this second side over. So there we have it. That's the first letter fold. It's just a simple tri-fold, just as the same way as if you were folding a business letter. You should have 3 layers right now, and the dough is nice and worked and pillowy, and it's starting to puff up real nice. All the butter is worked evenly into the dough. So now it's real important in between these folds, wrap this dough really tight and put it in the refrigerator for at least a half an hour. An hour is probably better, and then we're going to just pull this out and repeat the exact same process another 3 times. So before we can roll out our dough, of course, we're going to need cinnamon, and we're going to need brown sugar. This is non-GMO. I like the dark brown sugar Domino. It's nice and soft and has a very nice flavor to it. A lot of caramel notes to this sugar. And this is Vietnamese cinnamon, otherwise known as Saigon cinnamon. And the 2 main types of cinnamon are cassia, which is the bulk of the commercial cinnamon, and then Ceylon cinnamon, which is also known as true cinnamon. In all cases of the cinnamon, this is the outer bark of several different species of trees. This happens to be my favorite. The Vietnamese cinnamon has more oil than the other species and kind of has some of that red hot flavor. I love this. It's a lot more upfront cinnamon flavor. If you don't like such a profound cinnamon flavor in your pastries, you can seek out the true cinnamon, the Ceylon cinnamon. This is one that I found from Watkins in the baking aisle. Looks to be like pretty good stuff, but when I tested it out, it has nowhere near the amount of flavor that this Vietnamese cinnamon has. This is organic Vietnamese cinnamon. I would get the organic just because you just never know, what they're spraying on the trees over there, we should just say. So what I'm going to do is grind some of this up in a spice grinder and mix it with this brown sugar, and we're going to sprinkle that on the inside of our cinnamon rolls. So there you have it. I've given this Danish dough 4 of those trifolds, and you should end up with a nice, neat, smooth Danish dough. And so now I'm going to roll this out, and you could just roll this out if you're just doing the Danish dough portion of this. You can roll this out and to the thickness that you want, and make up your Danishes, whatever they may be, whether it's fruit, brown sugar, cinnamon, or bear claws, or there's just endless possibilities with this dough of dozens of different shapes and sizes of breakfast pastries like this. In this case, I'm actually making cinnamon buns out of this, cinnamon rolls out of this, whichever you say. And so I'm going to roll this out and cut it down into pieces and make logs out of it, which I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. Okay, so here we have it. I made a huge sheet out of my European Danish dough. Now, obviously, I'm making a huge batch. I'm having a cinnamon roll giveaway here, so I'm preparing for a lot of cinnamon rolls today, but just wanted to show you I've rolled this out to its final thickness. This should be, I don't know what that is, about a 1/4 inch, I would say. So now I'm going to divvy this dough up and give it the brown sugar cinnamon, and roll this up into logs. I'll show you how I accomplish that. Okay, sorry I have to put you off to kind of an angle here. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. But it's a large sheet of Danish dough, so I think the best tool for sheets like this is a pizza cutter. And also you can use a tape measure to kind of see how you're going to divvy this dough up to make if you're making cinnamon rolls out of this, then the easiest way is to roll it up and then firm it up in the refrigerator and then cut them down, and then you have to proof it to proof them. I'm making my cinnamon rolls in these cupcake tins like this because I don't like the big softball size cinnamon rolls. I think they're unnecessary. It's an extremely rich, luxurious pastry. So a cupcake size tin should be about the perfect size. I buttered this, and so now I'm gonna cut this down and make a roll that fits inside these. So first thing I think I'm going to do here is just pour all this cinnamon sugar over this. Be generous with this. After all, it is the flavor, where the true flavor and sweetness comes in. There's not a whole heck of a lot of sugar in this Danish dough, so this brown sugar is needed. Also provides the caramel notes to a truly excellent cinnamon roll. So just coat that down, spread it out nice and evenly like this. So then after you have your sheet measured off, and you can use your pizza cutter to cut it to the right shape. Since I'm doing so many, I'm kind of just eyeballing this up. What I did is I cut this sheet into thirds, and as you're rolling, kind of pull forward a little bit to make it tight. And now, so I'm thinking that's going to be about the thickness that I want right there. So I'm just going to cut that right there. So I think I'm going to get that much out of that. So as I said, these do need to be proofed. It's probably best though, depending on if it's the middle of winter, you may not have to firm these up. I think right now it's kind of a warm day here in central Pennsylvania. It's really beautiful out today. I'm gonna wrap this up real tight, and then I'll cut these down and put each of these pastries right there in the cupcake tins, and then we're just going to proof them at about 80 degrees until they double in size. So that's the process of how we're going to do this. And now I need to, of course, the only way to top truly great cinnamon rolls here in America is with a cream cheese frosting. So we're gonna get working on that next. All right, so while my pastry is baking, I'm going to show you how I put together cream cheese frosting for these cinnamon rolls. And what I have in here is confectioner's sugar and unsalted butter. Fit the mixer with the paddle attachment. And what I'm doing here first, before I put in the cream cheese and other ingredients, is I'm just kind of cutting the 10x sugar with the butter, because the butter will coat the sugar crystals and keep it from getting gritty on you. So then also just put a quick splash of brightness on this with a lemon. Squeeze some lemon in there. Try not to get any seeds like I'm about to. So then as soon as you have the lemon juice in there, now I'm going to put all of the cream cheese into this. And of course, in case I didn't mention it, I don't think I did, obviously all of these ingredients, the cream cheese and the butter, has to be at room temperature, or there's no way, you're just never, this will not come together for you at all unless you have your butter and your cream cheese at room temperature. And I would let those sit out overnight. If you let butter and cream cheese sit out overnight, you won't have any problems with it. So you'll have to scrape this down a couple of times. I'm also going to add about a tablespoon of some nice vanilla bean paste here. That's going to taste amazing in this. Alright, so I proofed these cinnamon rolls in the oven for about 10 or 15 minutes. They really didn't take very long. I think these little pastries are chomping at the bit to be baked off. And the way that I proofed this, I just turned on the oven for 2 to 3 minutes on real low, like 200 or less, just for a couple of minutes to get it a little warm. And be careful when you are proofing. Don't go real warm in the oven at all, because as you can see, I hit a little warm here, and now all of a sudden these are already leaking some of the butter out of it, and you don't want that. So if you see any butter at all in your tin, then pull them out. But other than that, I'm going to start these pastries at probably, I would say, 400 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to go kind of hot right at first, and then as soon as you start to see any color, just cut the oven back. I'm using convection because you don't want these to burn, so keep a close eye on these. They'll probably take around, I'm going to guess around 15 to 20 minutes until they're golden brown and delicious. We'll check them out. Definitely don't want to skimp on the cream cheese frosting. Okay, so we're going to try one of these authentic European cinnamon Danish rolls. And got a big old bowl of cream cheese frosting for the occasion here, and I'm just gonna try to do this. Yeah, these might be the most buttery, flaky, incredible pastries I've ever eaten. I'll tell you, it really pays when it comes to baked goods to try to do things the old-fashioned way and don't cut corners. This is absolutely incredible. Truly a delicious culinary masterpiece, if I do say so myself. The texture, it's got an incredible deep yeasty flavor to the pastry. The pastry actually tastes like something. It's not like when you go and you buy a grocery store whatever, it doesn't taste like anything. It's just sugar and hydrogenated fats. This stuff, on the other hand, this is amazing. This is like, yeah, it's just a thing of beauty. What else can I say?